original Floridian. I'm a Midwest girl, so I don't miss snow or cold, but sometimes, Um, so sometimes I like to hold on to the cold. So if you're in a cold spot, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to make light of your situation. I'm just saying that this morning it was low 70s, and for me, I was like, oh, let me put this jacket on. So thank you all so much for being here again. Let me jump into sharing my screen because I want to share the information that I have, and then I want to take any of your questions or any of the feedback that you have, and just roll with it. So let me share my screen. And there we are. Okay, let me start. Okay, so obviously, this is all about writing beyond the curriculum through journaling. So obviously, my focus today is going to be on journaling. My name, like I said, is Amy Kochek. So I wanted to give you a little bit of context with who I am and why I am passionate about this topic, a little bit about my background. So I started as a high school English teacher, and I was teaching high school for about 7 years in the Midwest, in Tennessee. So I've kind of been at a few different places, but I quit because I decided I wanted to pursue a dream. I didn't know what that dream was at the time, which then led me to self-publish a memoir. Um, but while I was doing all of this, I was in a evangelical Christian cult, which I stayed in for about 33 years. I left when I was 33. And self-publishing my memoir, writing my story is what saved my life and what changed my life. It started off as a lesson. I taught a lesson on integrity, and it was supposed to be this very nonfiction, be the same person you are on the inside that you are on the outside. I was using science. I was talking about trees. I mean, it was very complex. And of course, as a teacher, it was like right up my alley. And every time I kept teaching this lesson, it was people were saying, "Oh, you should write a book." And I thought, well, I've never wanted to write a book. I'm going to teach high school English until the day I die. This is irrelevant to my life. But after teaching it 8 times, I decided that I was going to try my hand at actually writing, and I wrote the book. But here's the interesting part: I was like sitting down to write all the nonfiction teaching points, like here's what you need to do. And I woke up at 3 a.m. and I started writing my life story. And it's interesting because like I lived my life, so it's not like I'm writing new details. But there was something about sitting down, and it was very stream of consciousness, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, which wasn't has never been my prime time for writing. But I'm sitting down and I'm writing, and it's very stream of consciousness, and it was like watching my life as a movie in front of my eyes. And instead of just living in my life, it was like being outside of my life and looking at the girl or the woman that I had become and realizing I have lost myself. Like, this is not what I want at all. This is not the life that I have signed up for. Like, and if I sign up for this life, I'm officially signing out. So it became a very therapeutic experience. And I decided that I was going to leave. And of course, as many traumatic stories of leaving very dogmatic, religious, at different levels, obviously, but I lost everything. So I started ground level, moved all the way to St. Pete, Florida, paradise. And I started a writing business called Amy Kochek Creative, and this is where I do ghostwriting. I mostly write um, memoirs, nonfiction. I do a lot of stuff for entrepreneurs, but I do ghostwriting, I do editing, and I do coaching for writers. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, the reason why I think journaling is so important across all subjects, is because I am dealing with adults. Now, my background is in high school. I teach at the college level now, and I deal with adults. So I've seen this at like all three levels. And what I have seen is how much we have taken the most beautiful practice of writing and the most beautiful experience of being able to take your thoughts, your experiences, your words, and utilize them. I don't care if it's academically, I don't care if it's for journalistic purposes, I don't care if it's in your own notebook that you're doing it. We've taken it and I feel like we've kidnapped it and we've stolen this beautiful thing. And so many of our students are struggling with this, but not just that, like so many adults. Like I get so many adults who come to me and they want help with their writing. Like they want to write a book or they just want to learn how to write or they want to access the power of writing. And it always starts with very similar phrases, which I'm going to get into. So I did Amy Coach It Creative. I came back to the classroom about 3 years ago to start teaching college because I missed the classroom environment. I love teaching, always will. And I really enjoy now taking so many of the experiences that I've had with writing and infusing them into the academic classroom because I think that it is relevant. I don't think that in the classroom we check our emotions or we check our experiences or our feelings at the door. The same that I don't believe that we do that in our career. I feel like that's why we've gotten to a place where we're pushing for emotional intelligence, why we're pushing for bringing more mental health advocacy into the career field. Because to ask somebody when they walk into any room, please check please check half of yourself at the door and just come in here and be a robot. After a while, that can really deteriorate, right? But and I'm not saying bring your whole chaotic self, right, and just be out of control. But I am saying that there's value in culminating all those things together, which is what we're going to talk about today. But as you'll know as we go through this, I'm very passionate about stories, about emotions, and about mental health and how we meld all of those together and bring it into every arena of our life without shame, without feeling like we have to hide, right? Because that's what kept me in a religious cult for 33 years of my life because I had to hide, because I had to deny so many parts of myself to fit into the mold of what somebody said you were supposed to be, or you were supposed to look like, or you were supposed to act like. And I'm very passionate about writing, obviously, because writing saved my life, and it continues to help me in my recovery. Like I spent 33 years in a very spiritually abusive environment that stripped me of so many things. So rebuilding that has been quite the experience, and writing has become such an integral part of that. Um, which is why I feel like the more that we utilize the different forms of writing in every arena, the more that we take the fear off of it. So that is my introduction. Now, what I want to do, and I just went backwards, but I don't want to go backwards. I want to go forwards. Okay. So what I want to do in the chat box, so I'm going to take this one at a time. So I want to just take a moment and focus on your writing experience. Let me move this over here. I want to focus on your writing experience. So in one word or phrase, I want you to describe what is your current relationship with writing? Where are you currently at with writing? So for instance, I can say my relationship with writing is a very vulnerable, close relationship. Daily, love it. I hate writing, Cassandra. I love that. Oh, Rosemary, recent published new author. Congratulations. Writing is my mistress. Yuri, I love that. I'm very interested in that. Krista, trying to love it because I need to love it. Vicky, love it. Recently published. Congratulations. Writing is my preferred form of communication. I love it. A lot of people have great relationships with writing in here. I love to hear it. Crystal, you write for work. Have at least 5 books in you. Oh, Roxanne, we got to talk. I've heard that so many times, right? A lot of us have multiple books inside of us, right? Or so many things we want to say. But there's so many reasons. But Roxanne, I love that. So I love the span, right? So some people hate it, some people are invested in it. Picture word with captions. God, I love to see this. Curtis, I've started writing a journal for the first time. Love it. So everyone's on different spectrums of the scale, right? So your current relationship with writing. Now, I want to go to the next question because this is where I think that writing has kind of been separated. So academically, if you think about your academic career from beginning from kindergarten all the way up until your most recent academic um, endeavors. Do you believe that your writing was cultivated or stifled? Crystal, cultivated. Excellent. Cultivated. I want to say Tanja or Tanya. I don't want to mispronounce your name, but cultivated. Okay, so many people saying cultivated. Cultivated. Excellent. Cultivated for sure. Tony, love it. Excellent. So many of us have had cultivating experiences, which I love, love, love to see. Okay. Vicki, you wrote short stories as a kid. I love it. I love it. So from the academic standpoint, right? Writing is definitely something that is focused on. It's something that is the goal in the academic environment is to cultivate writing. So I love that all of you have had that experience. Now, if you are somebody who has to grade writing right now, describe that experience and tell me why you have that experience, or describe how you're feeling when you are grading. So if part of your subjective, trying to be objective. Yes, dread. I didn't even have to explain this. Y'all already know. Excruciating. Wow. It's easier to grade structure than content. Yes. Wanting to be positive, but finding it hard. Cassandra, please. Yes. Difficult at best. Preaching to the choir. Try to be positive and encouraging. Yeah. That's always the hardest. I literally, I think 45 minutes before I got on this, I'm doing like final essays that I had to grade, and I had at no, it was like an hour. I said I need to take a break, otherwise I'm going to come into this professional development annoyed. Like I'm already going to be annoyed because sometimes when I grade, I'm like was I the only person in the lecture? Like wait, did I not record it? Like is this here? So I understand. I understand this. And somebody, I can't remember who said this. Tanya, I think it was you. You said trying to be, it's subjective, but you're trying to be objective, right? So grading writing can be super difficult, right? Because writing in and of itself, the way that we consume content is very subjective to us, right? Now, I'm not saying that like if somebody writes a clearly, disjointed sentences, there's no idea that they didn't, there's not like thought put into it. That doesn't take a lot of, that doesn't mean that I need like a whole bunch of rubrics to know, okay, not good, right? But a lot of times when we're sitting and we're grading students' work, it's like most of what we're grading is based on what we believe good writing to be, what we have consumed as good writing, or how we were taught, right? Which is different from one teacher to the next, even in college level. Like when I was in undergrad and in grad school, it was like one professor might value this style of writing while another professor might be the total opposite. And it's not that one person is right or one person is wrong. Like writing in general can be very subjective, which can be difficult for students, right? And it could be difficult for a teacher to figure out, okay, what are we really valuing here? And not from the standpoint of grammatical conventions, but more so the standpoint of content, the style of writing, the words, the way that it's communicated. That can be difficult to grade. Now, the last thing I want to ask you is, yeah, they try to write for the teacher. Exactly. Too many of the students appear to have been, yeah, like what students are coming with specific experiences too. So, and then we have to talk about the breakdown of how writing is taught in the secondary level, right? So sometimes the students come from the secondary classroom and they're coming into the college classroom. Like I've come and tried to teach introductions and talking about thesis, and they're looking at me like, thesis. And I'm thinking, yes, thesis. Like we were taught this in elementary school. So then there's a breakdown there, right? So all of this can be very frustrating. Now, my last question is, how do you incorporate writing into your curriculum currently? So it can just be if you're saying essays, or you can say, I don't incorporate writing. what's the main thing that you're using as far as writing to incorporate it into your curriculum? Essays and discussions. Yeah, and for most of us, it's going to be composition, discussions. Yeah. Anyone else? How are you cultivating or how are you incorporating writing into your curriculum currently? Discussions and feedback. Yeah, so a lot of us are utilizing discussions, essays, note taking, which are great focuses for the academic side. Now, I am going to take this a little bit in a different direction now. So I'm going to talk about so we have our academic side of writing, and I'm not trying to change any of that, right? Because we can do a series long professional development on how writing should or should not be taught from an academic standpoint in elementary, middle, high. I have my own opinions. I'm sure you have your own opinions. That's not what I want to focus on because the way that we're teaching writing is the way that we're teaching writing currently. What I am going to focus on is writing that you can incorporate into your curriculum that isn't necessarily attached to your content and to what you're doing and is completely attached to the student that either sits in front of you or the student that is on your online room, and writing that you can utilize that literally just gets them into the skill of writing, which here's where I feel like we've jumped the gun, right? So if we think of writing as a skill, and writing is so intricately connected to our brains, and just like with any muscle in our body, if I tell all of you, if we're meeting in person, right? Let's say we're doing this professional development in person, and I'm like, okay, so we're gonna put this on pause, and we're all gonna go and run the mile. So I hope you all brought running shoes. Let's go. Now, for someone that runs every day, perfect. I already have my shoes warmed up. I'm great, right? For somebody that even like works out 2 or 3 times a week, that might not be a huge ask. But if you're asking somebody who just sits on a couch every day and has done zero physical activity, getting them to run down a sidewalk is a chore, right? So for so many students, because writing, first of all, isn't really incorporated even into our society anymore as far as long form writing. I did copywriting for businesses for a while. And that's a very difficult switch from academic writing, right? Because academic writing is say all the words, and when you've said all the words, say more of them. And actually, say them more complicated because you really want people to think. That's kind of the academic style. But in the business world, if I'm putting something on a website, say it in an incomplete sentence. In fact, if it's more than 2 sentences, you've said too much. And also put how long it's going to take me to read it. Because if I get on your website and I'm reading and it's longer than a minute, I don't want to read it anymore. We literally have, and they did a study on this, which I'm so intrigued as to how they figured this out. But they did a study and said that human beings now have attention spans that are less than goldfish, which they said our attention span is 8 seconds. That means in 8 seconds or less, you gotta grab my attention, you gotta keep it. So when we are taking students and we're putting them in a position to say, hey, this essay is essentially you running a marathon. Now, I know that you haven't even walked around the block yet, but let me try to get you to this marathon, and that's the only focus. I'm saying, what if you incorporated exercises that gets them walking around the block so that when they start actually writing the essay, it's not as strenuous? I'm asking, can we build a bridge between the two while simultaneously incorporating so many extra benefits from journaling, which goes into physical health, mental health, emotional health, all at the same time? So let me focus here. So what I have found with a lot of my students who come to me, and this is not just this is from the high school environment, this is from the college environment, the relationship that most of my students have is very strained. Most of my students, and this is what these are the phrases that I hear. And It's not even, Tony, I love that. Using memes in your PowerPoint. Memes are so great. Um, this is not just from students. This is from adults. I hear these all the time. I'm not a good writer. How many times have we heard that? I'm not a good writer. Writing is so hard. I hate writing. I suck at writing. I've never been good at writing. My English teacher told me I was a bad writer. This last one, I worked with an entrepreneur, owned two businesses, was a multimillionaire, and was so scared to write a blog. He wanted to be a guest blogger. He was getting so crazy. He was getting inquiries. People were writing him saying, "Hey, can you write?" I think one of them was Forbes. Forbes contacted him. "Hey, we want you to incorporate your rep. We'll pay you." So he called me, and we couldn't even get him to write because he had such a fear of public writing. Like writing became a panic for him. And we had to, it started becoming therapy sessions to literally going back to his high school, middle school career and deprogramming the idea that because you didn't know or because you weren't good at following the guidelines and because you weren't good, because you scored low on your standardized test, doesn't mean that you're a bad writer. And it doesn't mean that you don't know how to write. And it doesn't mean that you cannot cultivate the skill of writing. Yeah, the teacher one, that hurt, right? Because a lot of times, even to the way that we teach writing sometimes, if we don't anchor it with something that's giving them positive encouragement, that's letting them know the words that you have in your mind, they're okay, right? What you're thinking is okay. So if we don't have something to bridge between the two, and the only deliverable we have is something that they're already panicked about, it's something that they're already disconnected with, then it's going to be even more difficult. And now we just make that relationship even more strained for them. So as I've looked at the reasons as to why, right, and some of us can have our own experiences. Um, a lot of times, and we mentioned this earlier, graded writing can be very subjective and it changes from class to class and teacher to teacher, right? So because each new teacher, each new class is learning a new way of writing or learning what's more important about writing or learning that, okay, my other teacher said I was great. I was getting A's, right? I heard this in high school a lot. She was getting A's last year, and this year she's getting B's. Why? Well, I don't know. I'm not that teacher, right? Because there is a level of subjectivity. Another thing is that sometimes in our rubrics, right, the language can be very general. We can just say, and I am so guilty of this. God, right when I was looking up the research on this, and it was talking about phrases that are confusing, and I would say weak, undeveloped, confusing, right? Without without more of a reasoning behind, well, this just sounded weak. You're just going to have to figure out a way to strengthen it, right? It can be it can be generalized feedback that sometimes the specifics of it really go back to, hey, what you're going to need to do is go back to your topic and dig deeper. That's still a hard word, right? Because good writing is just good self-awareness. It's good. It's when you're able to check into who you are and what you think and what you believe, right? Which in general, a lot of times in our own lives, right, we can become disconnected. What do I think about this topic? What do I believe? Right? Especially in a world where we're consuming so much information, and that information is telling us what to think and what to believe. So when we are put into a situation where we have to critically think, and now we have to access, once again, we're at marathon level. There's a lot going on there. A lot of times when it comes to writing, and this is especially true in Florida and probably true all over the United States, but I know a lot of the students I deal with are in Florida. But a lot of it is connected to the standardized test and specifically the FCAT, which is the writing test. So every time they hear writing and they're exposed to it, it is connected to a test that's going to grade them and tell them, you're a terrible writer. So writing then becomes performance based. It becomes a place where they go and they feel like they're not good enough, right? Sometimes they're taught that some people are just better at it than others, right? Like, well, this you're either a writer or you're not a writer, which is totally not true. But sometimes these are the things that we embrace. Long form writing is becoming less common, right? Like I said before, the idea of reading long form, especially for our students, is not necessarily a common practice. And then, of course, our first major introduction with writing was in the academic setting. For most of us, that's where we first started writing. And for most of us, that meant that was structure. There was structure put on it, which, like I'm saying, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's also something that we can do that takes the pressure and the structure and the performance base away from it and just allows students to see writing for what it is, which is one of the most powerful gifts that we have been given on this planet. And I know that sounds really intense and overdramatic, but I believe it. I 100% believe it because I've lived it. I have lived it and I continue to live it. So, from the standpoint of just writing in general, right, we can just take like the physical side of it. So, there was a neurobiologist named Barry Gordon. So, he did this whole brain scan and he talked about how when you are writing, something so unique is happening. And that shouldn't say solely, that should say fully, but it is what it is. Your brain is fully active most of the time. So when he was doing this scan, so much of our brain is being utilized, right? It's being utilized as you are writing. So much is going on. And the more that we're writing, the more neural connections that we're making into our brain. Which means that as we're making these more neural connections, just like when I'm going into the gym, as I'm going to the gym and I am putting pressure on my muscles are growing. So the same thing is happening with the brain. So the first thing is, like, when you're teaching writing or when you are giving the students opportunity to write, that's essentially how it should be presented. This is a unique opportunity, one from a physical standpoint, because what this is doing is this is literally giving your brain a workout, right? You are literally making more connections from a physical standpoint. And then on the other side, right, when we're just talking about what's happening to us mentally, emotionally, even spiritually, right? Cambridge University Press said that 20 minutes of expressive writing, just 20 minutes they did it between two groups, a group that did expressive writing and a group that just did neutral topics. And when I'm talking expressive writing, this is where we're getting more to the journal side of it, where we're getting to the side where you're just writing and it's connected to you. You're not writing for a grade. You're not writing for to create an essay. You're not writing for a test. You're just writing. Okay. So between these two groups, 20 minutes, just 20 minutes of this on the span of how long the study was for a day, the people who were doing the expressive writing had better physical and mental health than those who just wrote on neutral topics. So when we're talking about writing, I remember listening to this interview, and it was with, I don't know if you guys watch The Office, or if you're an Office fan. They took it off of Netflix, and I'm offended forever. But the guy who plays Rainn Wilson, the guy who plays Dwight on The Office, he wrote a book and he was talking about writing in his book. And one of the things that he said about writing in his book that I thought was so powerful, he said, writing is prayer. It is as spiritual as prayer, because what you are doing when you are writing is you are accessing deep thoughts and emotions. You are accessing you. It's like having a conversation with yourself. It's like spending time with yourself. It is taking the time to pause and reflect, whatever the point of that writing is. And I thought that was so true, because when I sat down at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm literally just writing my story, something dramatically shifted inside of me. To be able to see my words in front of my face about my life shifted everything, right? Writing is also your expressive right. I always ask my students, I say, if I asked you a question about a topic, do you have words to respond to that topic? And of course it's like, well, yeah, of course. So then I ask a question, whatever's going on, right? So I can say, what are your thoughts on the gas prices right now? And of course, all the students, oh, I think it's this, and I think it's this, and it's connected to this. So it's like all this discourse, right? And then I pause and I say, why is that different from when I ask you to write it? Because really, what you're doing is you're just communicating your thought, you're communicating what's here, and you're just verbally communicating it, right? I said, so if you're able to verbally communicate it, that means that the ideas are there. It's just there's a block when I say write, something lights up, right? So it's not the let's work on the writing, it's let's work on the block that's making you feel like when you're writing, you need to panic, that you don't feel good enough, that you feel like you can't do it. So a lot of times it just comes to consistently encouraging our students when it comes to writing to say, writing is a skill just like anything else. And the more that you do it, the better that you get at it. And the thing that is blocking you is not your inability. It's not that you're bad at it. It's not that you can't do it. It's just that you're believing these things. And the minute that we stop believing these things is when we can easily flow, when the flow starts getting better, when the ideas start coming. Writing also is a way to help us have a deeper connection with ourselves, right? Writing, the power of writing, it encourages critical thinking and it gives us access to our infinite mind. It gives us access to things we didn't even realize are inside of our mind. So now, how do we incorporate this? So, of course, like I said, when we're talking about healing the relationship, that's a big part. I believe that journaling is a way to heal the relationship that students have with writing. Because I feel like when a student's relationship with writing is strained and we're trying to fix it with difficult writing, right? If my relationship is strained, if I take it back to the physical, right? If I really want to run a mile, but I can't walk down the sidewalk, then to get to the point of running a mile, I don't just keep throwing them on the track and saying, okay, try harder again. Okay, just do it again. It's going to consistently be something that they dread. I'm not saying take away the mile. I'm just saying let's look at what the sidewalk has to offer. So when we encourage them by doing short form journal writing that is expressive, that's connected to them, that's just connected to what they know, what they feel, and maybe even things that they don't even personally access, what happens is we're getting them in the mode of just creating. Because that's really the form. Get them in the mode of creating and to stop saying, I'm a bad writer. Like, I don't allow my students to say that. Once they say it, I'm like, okay, that's a baseline, but that's not the issue. The issue is we're healing your relationship with writing. You just have a strained relationship. We're just going to heal it. When they do journal, when you do start getting them into a journaling practice, you are affirming their ideas in writing and you're not just looking at the structure and the grammar, the punctuation. That can be done on the large form essays. But when it comes to the journaling, that's just when you're engaging with ideas. I am consistently utilize positive language and it's easy in the journaling environment, right? Because I'm just encouraging idea creation. I love that you shared this with me. What I thought was interesting about this was, and it gives me a chance to genuinely do it, right? As opposed to an essay that can be so riddled with errors that you're like, God, there's 50 things on here and I'm trying to be positive, but my positive can just be, thank you for turning this in on time, right? It's like I can't genuinely affirm sometimes on the academic side because there's so much strain there. But if I have a bridge in the journal, I have more engaging, authentic, encouraging conversations with my students. Also, allow them the opportunity to identify their fears when it comes to writing. Like I said, give them a baseline. If they don't like writing, I always take a poll at the beginning. This is a heavily, we're going to be writing a lot. But before we start, I want to know, like, where are you all at? It was important for me to know that about all of you, right? Before we get into that, where do you stand with writing? How do you feel about writing? Because that energy then comes out, right, when you're teaching writing. So you have to understand the power of writing just as much as your students do. Even from the standpoint of when I'm writing an essay, it's not just that I'm writing an essay to turn in, right? We live in a society that gives us the opportunity to share our ideas, to share what we're thinking in our head and allow other people to discuss based on that. That is a liberty, that's a freedom. And the minute we stop doing that, the minute we give up that freedom, is the minute that we silence our opinions, silence our voice. That's a scary place to be. So I always tell my students too, even if we're writing essays, this is an opportunity. This is a gift because not everybody has this gift. When you're doing journaling as well, you're helping them overcome the fears by demystifying the experience with writing. Because a lot of times what I have seen, I will have students who will do the journaling, and I'm going to show you in the next slide, but I'll have students who will come back to me and say, I never realized that I could journal and feel like this. I never realized that I could even write like this. So obviously we talked about why this is so important, right? One, I've dealt with so many adults who are afraid to write, who have given up this amazing gift to write. And I hope that this gets you on the journey to start journaling, because we could do a whole session just on the power of journaling for our personal selves, because it continues to change my life as well. As we are moving through what's going on in society, mental health concerns, specifically in our students, are skyrocketing. So what can we do as educators to bridge that? To be a place for our students, not just to say, okay, leave all that at the door, let's pretend that nothing is happening and just focus on academics. It's very difficult to do that. But if you're giving students the ability to have access to a place where they can find safety, and it's through writing, the amount that the change that you're going to see in what you are getting from the essay standpoint is it's amazing, which is why I'm here teaching this today. Some of my adults that come to me that want coaching are even scared to write simple emails. That's how afraid they are of putting their own thoughts into words. And then even anxiety that comes to long form. So now let me talk really quickly about journaling, because I want to give you examples of the types of journals that you can use. So when you're journaling, one, it forces the practice of writing. Writing is a skill, writing is a practice, just like anything else. I remember when I was in geometry. I was terrible at geometry. I remember one acronym, and I remember somebody asked me to tutor them at geometry, and I was like, a surefire way for you to fail is to hire me as your tutor. But I remember it was late 90s, and I had an older instructor, and I remember my mom went to parent-teacher conference, and she was like, my daughter's failing, what do I do? And he was like, listen, she's a woman. She's just not good at math, and that's okay. And I remember my mom shared that with me, which I don't know. I was young. I know, Roxanne. And that was before the Me Too movement. So it's kind of like, oh, this is funny. But at the time, I embraced that. So if you put a math problem in front of me, immediate panic. I kept saying that. I'm not good at math. And then I remember when I got hired at a lockdown facility for troubled youth, and I taught there for 2 years, all boys, ages 12 to 18. I could write a book about that experience. But I had to teach all subjects. So guess what I had to teach? I had to teach math. I'm not certified, right? But they needed teachers. I needed a job. So it was a perfect marriage. And I remember sitting down and looking at these math books and feeling that panic because I'm not good at math, right? I had memorized that affirmation. And I'm starting to look at it, and I had to literally practice math. And I had to teach it to myself. And I would spend time doing it. I would sit in front of it, and I kept telling myself, I am good at math. Math is not the enemy. And it's crazy because not only did I become good at math, I was able to teach math, and then I went on to tutor math, which is a whole nother story. But I'm saying that to say when you're journaling, it is getting you in front of your fear and just producing. it is just creating that skill without the pressure. It familiarizes the students with their voice and it gets them empowered to share their voice. Because some students don't believe that what they have to say is important. They don't believe that what they have to write is important. And when they're writing and you're affirming and it's about themselves, how powerful is that? It takes the pressure out of writing. It builds confidence of their ideas, of their expression, more personal responsibility. They're more connected to it. It assesses their thoughts on a variety of topics. It allows us to teach writing outside of just being a writing teacher. This can be used in any class, any class. And it also helps remove the blocks that hinder us from learning and hinder academic growth, because it doesn't matter how many, I don't care how many ways you try to teach writing. If you do it as an acrobat, if you do it on movies, if you do visuals, until we address the fact that our students are afraid of it, that our students feel inadequate, that they feel like we can't do it, no strategy will trump that. And this is where we can say, you take the responsibility, because all I'm asking you to write is something that's personal to you. And I'm going to look at it and I'm going to encourage it and I'm going to affirm it. Now, when I was, this is just a couple examples and I'm not going to read through all of them, but when I started incorporating journals, I first started with just 2 journals. And one of the journals said, I want you to just tell me what's something that's bothering you right now. Take as much time as you need. I don't care what's bothering you. I don't care if a student was never turned in nothing. And this was always week 4. 100% participation on that one, every single time. I don't care if a student told me he hates writing. They would always show up for that. Always. And I would get these long form, right? Financial burdens, an emotional incident, somebody talking about a pregnancy that they lost, like students really allowing themselves to share, right? And my response was always encouraging. And this also gives us the opportunity to connect to our students and allow them to connect back to themselves and affirm not just their writing, but affirm where they're at in life, whatever that looks like, right? And all of these are not emotional dumps, but some of them can be, because life is hard right now, you know? So giving students a space that says, this is a space where we are going to learn, but I recognize that you're not a robot that's just going to come in and you have a deliverable. I recognize that some of you have children, partners, that you have full-time jobs, part-time jobs. I recognize that some of you are struggling with mental health, physical health. So there's a safe space for you here, where we're not just going to be, we're working on writing, but we're also working on you just allowing yourself to produce something that is connected to you, that you can be proud of. So that when we get to the bigger things, so that when we get to the things that require more thought, that require more effort, that you're already plugged into the process, that your confidence is already being built. These are just some of I get these emails all the time at the end of the course, during our reflective discussion, and personal emails. And these are simple. One of my students, I wanted to thank you for opening my eyes up to what writing is. One of my other students, I always hated English classes or anything that involved writing because I always thought I was terrible at it. The journals made this class 100 times better, and now I went from being miserable about your class to being excited. As an older student who has never taken an online class, the writing journals have really helped work through my emotions when it comes to college and writing. Each one of these, like every time I do reflective, that is a reflection on the course. That is the main feedback. So when you are working through, there's so many different types of journals that you can include, right? So it doesn't just have to be journal prompts that you include, but I'm including, I think there's 15 of these, and I'm just going to give you them, and I'm going to give you just a little bit of a synopsis of what that could look like in your inclusion of your journals. So one is just called stream of consciousness, and it's interesting because we just did a stream of consciousness last week, and it was just, tell me where you're at right now. What's going on? You can pick whatever topic you want, just stream of consciousness, right? And the things I got were so beautiful. One of my students shared that he had a best friend pass away, and he talked about his grief process that week. And but he spent most of the journal just talking about how beautiful their friendship was and how grateful he was. I was in tears reading it. Another student just talked about the beauty of her partnership and how much she enjoys being in a relationship. Another student talked about how frustrated she was with gas prices. It's all over the place, but it's a place for them. And it's so, what's so interesting? They follow the grammar conventions more in the journals than they do on their essays. It's insane. Because if you think about it, they're plugged in, they're enjoying it, right? So stream of consciousness. The second one is third person. And I tell my students, we usually incorporate this from the standpoint of sometimes in life, you get so stuck in your narrative and what's going on that sometimes you have to step outside of yourself. So I always say, I want you to look at your life as if you're outside of your life. Write about yourself and what's going on. And it's so interesting what they'll come up with. And a lot of times it's from a standpoint of pride. I see a woman who has 3 kids who decided to go back to college. I'm proud of her. Get out of yourself and look at yourself as if someone else is looking at you. What do they see? So that's the third person journal. A check-in is just, I want you to check in with yourself. Because we check in with everyone else, I want you to check in with yourself. How are you? We do mood journals sometimes, and this can be a really quick spot one. Today I feel blank because blank. Because sometimes we come in with a lot of baggage. Let's let it out. Free flow it, however you feel. Unsent letters. This is a really big one. So a lot of times I tell them for the unsent letters, if you have something that you're holding on to, right? An unsent letter is a letter that you can write to someone that you never send, but that you write expressing. You can write it. They can be living, they can be dead. And it's such an amazing, powerful experience. A reflection journal. I do this a lot when we get into the weeds of the content and the students feel overwhelmed. And I tell them, I don't want you to reflect over the content. I want you to reflect over you. From the beginning of the course till now, how do you feel about yourself? And then that gives me an opportunity in the comments to give them genuine feedback to affirm, you should be proud of yourself. I'm proud of you. Or if they're really getting down on themselves, I can do, I see that you're having a difficult time, but you know what I also see? And that gives me a chance to affirm them when they're getting in the weeds. A reading journal. This is really great for if you're reading something more complex, but with the reading journal, I always have them take it a little bit further. And I tell them, do the reading journal as if it's not academic. So don't try to impress me. Like if the first line sounds stupid, I want you to say sounds stupid. Obviously, don't use curse words, but be as real as you want to be in the reading journal. Gratitude journal is a big one. So one thing I always tell my students is that a lot of times when we're living in a state of lack and we feel panicked and like we don't have enough, I said the way to get out of it is what is something that you're genuinely grateful for, but don't just write the word. Tell it to me tell me a story about it. Tell me a story about something that you're genuinely grateful for. I do worst, best case scenarios. So a lot of times anxiety comes from us creating a scenario in our head that's like worst case scenario, obviously. So I always tell them, think about something in your life that you're really anxious about. I want you to write, what's the worst case scenario? What would be the worst thing that could happen and how would you respond to it? And then below that, I tell them, now I want you to write, what's the best case scenario and how would you respond to it? And then once they have those two out, I said, now that you see both of them, you have nothing to be afraid of. Because even in the worst case scenario, you already have it figured out. You know what you're going to do, right? So because anxiety comes from the unknown, but when we make it known, we don't need to be afraid anymore. And it really becomes a very funny activity because your worst case scenario can be all the way in left field, but it's like when you really start looking at it, you're like, oh, I mean, I can really work with this. A letter to your future self. I have my students write this at the beginning as letter to your future self when you finish this course. And then sometimes I take it further, letter to your future self when you have graduated, right? And that's always encouraging when they're like feeling overwhelmed. Go to that letter, remind yourself what you said to yourself. Dream, vision, and goals journal. You can make this as a list journal. You can have them pick one. You can have them talk about what is it that you really want for your life, because that can help them really center themselves back to the content. Because sometimes we know when we're in school, it's like, I don't even care anymore. I can work at Publix. I hear they have great benefits, you know? So it's like if you keep them focused on what are your goals, what are your dreams, what are your visions. I also I have them do pride statements or pride stories. So when they're feeling bad about themselves or just feeling like they're a failure, I want you to tell me, whether it be for the class, for your life, what's something that you can be proud of, and tell me the story of that. Sometimes I have them do reality versus presentation. And what I mean by that is I tell them a lot of times we can become so used to wearing a mask. We present a certain way, but the reality is very different. Let's talk about those two things. And then in my affirmation is affirming the what is real, the presentation or the reality. So if I'm saying I look really happy, but sometimes I'm just really sad right now, the affirmation can be, man, like it's okay to be sad sometimes. You know, you don't have to stay there, but know that that's an okay emotion. Sometimes I'm sad, you know? So it encourages them to continue to pull out that authentic version with that authentic voice. Lessons learned is a really fun one. What's a lesson that you've learned in your life? How did you learn it? That's always a fun reflection because I get funny stories. Idea collection. Sometimes that can be like a topic, right? And this is very similar to brainstorming. So as you can see, the things that you're doing, even in your journaling, is incorporating the writing process, but it's outside of an academic assignment, right? So an idea collection is just what are your ideas around this topic, and let's talk about them. So those are just, and let me stop sharing my screen. Those are just a few, and obviously those are only 15 of them. And when I tell you, you can go online and find hundreds of journal topics that you can incorporate. It doesn't even have to be every week. But the most important thing, and I'm going to tell you this, because this is something that I have found for myself. Sometimes it's really hard in the discussions or even in the doing essay feedback to get really excited about academic feedback sometimes, right? Because sometimes, especially if it's the same discussion board that you've been doing 1,000 times over, it's like, great point. I agree that Stephen King's assessment of this. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't inspire me sometimes. But I'm telling you, even as an educator going to these journals, I learn from my students. And it's like I'm encouraging my students, but I'm also encouraging myself. And what I have seen is not only are the students leaving my class feeling more empowered as just individuals by their own writing, but I find I've had students reach out to me before, after the course, emailing me saying, do you believe that like I'm writing my emails and I'm like writing full body paragraphs and I'm looking for topic sentences and thesis statements? And I'm like, mind blown. But that relation, I'm getting it from students who said, I hate writing. I've never been good at writing. And I am 100% confident that it is because of that bridge that I am creating. And I encourage you all to at least try. The studies can say a million things, but only you will connect to it unless it starts working in your class. So I encourage you to do that. And I also encourage you to do it in your own life because from a person who is using it now and who will continue to use it, it has completely changed my life. I know that all of you have another place to be. Thank you so much. That's all I have for you. Thank you. I was seeing the comments. I love that you all were discussing with each other and giving each other ideas. Thank you all for attending and for being here. I had so much fun. Have a great rest of the day in your other classes.